duties.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Gunaratna, for taking our time speaking to us on NewsX World today. Meanwhile, we're shifting focus away from the Middle East towards another region which is on the boil. Yes, I'm referring to the Russia-Ukraine war. We're now learning that US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff has stated that he will meet with Ukrainian representatives in New York this week. Meanwhile, Washington continues to talk to Russia as the US seeks to end Moscow's war. Meanwhile, Witkoff has stated that he's meeting with the Ukrainians this week in New York, and he's called it a big signal. He has stated that they do talk to the Russians every day, and has added that he thought that Russian President Vladimir Putin wanted to end the war. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has announced his official meet with representatives of US President Donald Trump in New York as part of intensified mediation efforts to end the war with Russia. Let's in fact hear what Zelensky has had to say.
В п'ятницю Сполучені Штати Америки, Нью-Йорк, зустрічі з командою президента Трампа. Будуть залучені всі, хто працює над змістом безпекових гарантій. Військові, політичні, економічні компоненти гарантій безпеки. Завдання – прискоритись максимально, щоб це було теж важелем впливу. Росіяни мають бачити, наскільки серйозно світ налаштований та наскільки поганими будуть наслідки для Росії, якщо війна буде продовжуватись.
All right, there, viewers, we've heard what exactly Zelensky has had to say. Meanwhile, joining us on the broadcast this morning is Major General G.G. Dwivedi. He's a defense expert joining us live from New Delhi. Thank you so much for taking our time, speaking to us on NewsX World. A lot of high-octane developments are taking place even as far as the Russia-Ukraine war is concerned. Several meetings are taking place, conversations are taking place over phone lines. Steve Witkoff slated to meet Ukrainian representatives in New York later this week. Washington and Moscow are maintaining contact, yet we have not seen any sort of meeting, any sort of trilateral catalyzing up until now. There was a lot of murmur earlier about Budapest being chosen as one of the locations, then reports coming in that Turkey and even the Gulf nations were being roped in order to find a possible location to set up this meeting. Yet Kremlin then came out yesterday evening and rejected any prospects of talks, especially if the security guarantees involve troops being on the ground, NATO troops being on the ground in Ukraine. So where do you see this headed next?
Well, Pia, absolutely. While the efforts are on to end this war, especially President Trump is steering the process, but as we all know, that it appears that President Putin is not very serious the way he has deflected the trilateral talks, the way the campaign is going on in Ukraine, and even the missiles and drone attacks are going on. I think President Putin is not very keen to come on the table, at least on the trilateral meeting, for simple reason because he has laid a couple of stated his red lines. And first and foremost is that any negotiation can take place only when there is a security guarantee. Secondly, he wants Ukraine to be demilitarized. He wants to have a guarantee that the NATO option for Ukraine is off the table. And more importantly, he wants to enlarge the territorial gains. And that's why probably he is not very keen to come on the trilateral meeting. At the same time, I think President Trump and the European Union have realized that this war is not going to end anytime soon. And so therefore, they have worked out a new mechanism to provide arms to Ukraine, especially the air defense system, so that Ukraine can defend itself. And on the Ukrainian Independence Day, the European leaders had gone and Chancellor Merz and also the Canadian Prime Minister have promised that the required aid will be given, and like Patriot missiles, other defense systems. So, Pia, all I can say is that while the efforts are on by President Trump to end this war, but is not going to end anytime soon because President Putin is not inclined until the conditions that he laid are met, and which, of course, are unacceptable to Ukraine as also to the European Union and America here.
Indeed, and we've seen some recent comments also come out from the US administration, especially with regards to this war. In the latest, one of the advisors of Donald Trump, Navarro, has now come out and stated that this war is Modi's war, which is quite interesting because since day one, India has advocated for peace. India has advocated for all parties to come to the negotiating table in order to find a solution through dialogue. What do you make of this statement from the Trump administration?
Well, I think India had taken a very considered stand that the war should be resolved through dialogue, and fighting is not the option. And that's what Prime Minister Modi had stated, that this is not the era of war. But I think India doesn't have much of clout to directly, either mediate or influence Russia or Ukraine, because there are other players who are in the game, and the main player is President Trump. And secondly, is that America has taken a very, I would say, lopsided stand that India is fueling the war by buying oil from Russia, which is not exactly the case, because there are other people like China who are buying much more oil. So therefore, at this time, now finger pointing at India very obliquely is not fair, because India is not the main player which is funding the war in Ukraine, and that is by buying Russian oil. So I think that these statements are off the cuff. What really matters is India's considered stand that the war should end and it should be through dialogue, and that position remains unchanged. But ironically, what America, Trump, and his advisors are actually finger pointing is not right, because India has only very limited role. Yes, we can approach, Putin and approach Zelensky, but the main architect to actually steer the process is President Trump and the other players in the European Union.
All right,
Yeah.
sir, I request you to stay on with us. We're getting more reports